YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe to keep up with posted shows and comment on them below the video.
You are listening to Lone Star Community Radio on 104.5 KCZW LP Conroe and 106.1 KZCC LP Conroe and worldwide on irlonestar.com.
Welcome to the Legal Connection with Tony Lynn Collins and Cheryl Ellsworth Jahani. I'm Cheryl, and we're here today, every Tuesday, actually, from 12 to 1 p.m. You can log in to irlonestar.com and listen live, or you can catch us on 104.5 or 106.1 Conroe's FM. Tony and I have a legal show to connect with you, our listeners, and help you with legal challenges, questions, issues, or suits that you may have. We want to do this as a community service to the residents of Conroe and its surrounding areas, because we know that it can be difficult. And, at some point in everyone's life, they are ultimately faced with some sort of a legal situation, whether it's a divorce or a custody issue of your grandchildren, or even a juvenile situation from detention to, I don't know, getting caught late at night smoking cigarettes and you're underage. So we're here to help you. We discuss legal topics every week. And last week, May 1st, we were talking about lease agreements and evictions. And we just want to continue that theme. We're waiting on Tony here. Her middle name is late. Tony Lynn Collins, Tony L. Collins for late. So we're waiting for her, but it's okay. We're doing great. I'm going to give you a brief overview of what we talked about last time. We talked about lease agreements, and, it's the same sort of situation. At some point in most everyone's life, they're faced with a lease situation, a rental situation, and so that's what we've been talking about. And then last week, we also got into evictions. We're talking about evictions last week, and there's Miss Late. She's here. Hey, Tony. Gracefully across the street. I saw that. Well, so I was just doing a brief recap on what we were talking about last week, and we got to evictions, and we were talking about, I think the lease, for our listeners, probably a lot of them are, they're leasers, but a lot of them are landlords too, right?
Lessors, yes.
Right. Lessees or lessors. That's right.
And landlords. It makes it so much easier.
Right. That's so true. So, but last week we were in the middle of talking about evictions, and then we talked to our wonderful station manager, Dick, about that terrible situation with his fiance and the rats in the rental property that she has. But I was just going to go over the evictions and the three requirements of the eviction process from the landlord's perspective, but also the tenant's perspective, because they're going to be served with all of these things. So the first thing is the landlord has to give the tenant notice that they need to leave, that notice to vacate.
Proper notice, yes.
Proper notice. It needs to be proper.
And it's set out in the Texas Property Code exactly how that can be done properly. And we went over that a little bit last week.
Right. Some of the things we talked about last week was in the notice to vacate, you need to have the property location listed. You need to have the landlord and tenant's names.
Yes.
And you need to state why the eviction is taking place.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it seems to me I recall in the notices I've done before, I didn't actually, I think it was always for rent. So I just put the amount of rent due, and I put it in an envelope so it wouldn't be, obnoxious. So I guess that is a part that's due for it, but I just didn't recall that actually having put the reason on there before.
Yeah.
But follow, if in doubt, just Google the Texas Property Code, and if you mess up on that notice, it could affect your ability to get your eviction done as quickly as you'd like, because it'll stop, if it's done improperly, it'll stop the judicial process.
Oh, okay. Because it won't be effective. It doesn't have some things in it.
Because you made it, they're going to say there's a material error in the way it was, the formality of how it was done. And these people that stay over in their they're and leases they know.
Yeah.
They are experts.
Some of them are professionals. That's true. I remember we were mediating a case when I was in JP court, and there was this woman that had, she was a young woman, and she had developed a relationship with a very, very old man that was about to pass away. And he died, and she wasn't on the lease, but she wouldn't leave. And so we were trying to convince this woman that she needed to move out because it was going to ruin her credit.
And was it you, the landlord, and their attorney, or who was all there at the mediation?
The landlord, there was a judge there that was sort of a mentor that was teaching, doing some mediation with us. Judge Bruce Wayne Wetman.
Bruce Wayne.
And so anyway, I remember Judge Wetman and I were in the room trying to convince this holdover tenant is what we call her.
Right.
But it was interesting because she wasn't anywhere on the lease, and all her stuff was now on the property, and she didn't want to leave. And we said, it's just going to ruin your credit. We know you don't want to have ruined credit because we were doing mediation. Well, no, you know what she said? She said, it's not going to ruin my credit. I'm not on the lease anywhere. And when she said that, both Judge Wetman and I looked at each other like, holy crap, this woman's a pro. She knows.
Oh, yes. Yes. These people all know. In fact, you learn a few things when you run into these pros.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, so then we got notice, and it's proper, right? So now we have lawsuit and a trial.
Right.
So you have to sue them, and then you go to trial. And that's when the mediation that I was talking about. A lot of courts believe in this mediation. And like I think I said last time, I settled every case I had because, most of the time when you've got this holdover tenant, there's something going on. They just want more time.
Well, the way I see it is they're going to lose if they breach the lease.
Exactly. They're not paying.
They're in possession. So the alternative is the judge is going to tell them to leave.
Right.
So
our saying was
it's just a nice way to kind of give them a chance to.
And get the landlord to give them a little bit more time. And a lot of times the landlord doesn't want back rent. They just want them out, so they can move on.
Well, they're not going to get the back rent.
Right.
They just got to, they have to do what they have to do to make this as easy as possible. Otherwise, the sheriff gets involved with the writ of possession. And it's so bad for the landlord to have to go through all that because they don't want to be the bad guy and they end up being the bad guy. And there's stuff on the sidewalk. So, yes. Mediation is a nice way of getting around it if you've got a professional that's staying in your property that won't get out. And so we have a lawsuit and a trial. And obviously, like you just alluded to or stated, actually, the landlord's going to win. We had this saying that said, if you don't pay, you don't stay. And that's just life. People, you got to pay your rent. And, I think even this writ of possession and all of this stuff is a landlord being patient and following the legal procedures that are outlined, set forth, And we also have, the FED, we talked about the forcible entry and detainer. Right. Those are just expedited procedures because this happens so often that going through the regular legal channels would take years to get this done. So they've got an expedited procedure. So then we also have, now we've had the lawsuit, we had the trial, the landlord won because they will win if you're not paying your rent. They don't always win. It's funny. People, when they go to the JP court, because they have nothing but the eviction docket.
Right.
And it's open to the public and it's sort of entertaining, really. I mean, not that you want to be there. A lot of times you're there for whatever reason, like I've been in there to get a reset and you'll sit down and watch.
Yeah.
And sometimes the tenant actually wins because the landlord is improperly evicting them. They'll say that they didn't receive rent, whereas the tenant can show that they did. The landlord may want them out because they can get a higher rent, whatever the case may be. Sometimes they win. And I was watching one where the landlord was evicting them because of his claim was that the tenants had been rowdy and they were breaking the law and they needed to get out. And I'm not really quite sure why they wanted them out. I think maybe some of the neighbors were complaining it was loud and or whatever the case may be, but not overly loud. There was just a lot of people in this apartment, and I guess it was more of the rent wasn't that high, and so they had everybody and their brother, but not staying for long periods of time, only for 2-day periods. And so really they weren't breaching the lease, but they were sort of bending the rules really significantly.
Yeah.
And but the landlord had the burden of proof to show that they breached it, and they didn't, and the judge let them stay.
Good.
good, I guess. Depends on which way you look at it.
My heart always goes out
Yeah.
to the tenant, and I don't know why, because I've owned lots of rental property, but I don't know. My heart goes out to that party. So we have the lawsuit, the trial that could go one way or the other. But I mean, if you're not paying rent, you're not going to stay in the property.
Yes.
And then we have the removal from the property. And this is kind of where we left off last time. The removal from the property, just because the landlord or the landlord, because we're talking about removal from the property, the landlord has one in trial does not mean they don't have to do anything else. They can't just go, okay, get out. I want in trial, leave. There's a process that they have to follow.
Right.
Right.
And fortunately, it is on most of the JP court. That's where your eviction is going to take place, is in the Justice of the Peace Court,
Right.
unless it's appealed and it ends up in the county court. But the process is set out on most of the websites. So if someone's not following us completely, or if we miss something, then definitely our listeners should just go to the JP Court website, and it's usually they're very, very good in Montgomery County about setting out what you need to do.
Absolutely. I just want to add that the only time that it needs to go into a district court is if there's a dispute over ownership of who owns that property. So if one of our listeners is, this is my house and so supposedly bought it from my brother, blah, blah, blah. If there's a dispute over title to property, that goes into the district court. So you guys need to know that you may be dealing with a district court situation.
But evictions,
those are your
they're
facts.
JP first.
Right.
And then if there's an appeal, it gets appealed to the county court.
Right.
And then typically it's not going to go to the district level but you're right. If there's a title issue,
Then it's a district
but that's
court.
usually, it's going to end up in district court, I think, when you've got maybe a contract to buy. When there's an issue where the renter wants to lease to own, then you've got a whole different ball of wax. It's no
Right.
longer just an eviction, because they've got some equity in the property,
Right.
or they may have actually, because they're trying to own it, they've got a contract for deed or whatever it may be. And also the process that we're talking about applies somewhat to mobile homes, but RV parks and mobile homes have a whole different set of rules than just your typical apartment complexes or house leases, which is kind of what we're directed at today. Because
Right.
I had lots and lots of questions on RV parks, and people, the owner of the RV park asking the person to move their
RV.
their RV or their mobile home, whatever, off of the property, and it's a whole different ball of wax. So we're really focusing on, I guess, apartment complexes and
Mhm.
property that's on a structure. It's not
Right.
on a trailer. It's not mobile, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. Okay. So what does the landlord have to do after they have won at trial to remove the tenant from the property? They have to get a writ of possession, present it to a law enforcement officer, right? They have to give them notice that they're going to get their stuff out. They have to give them a time that they need to be out by. And then the law enforcement officer, if they're not out by that time, after the officer posts a notice for the tenant on the property, then the tenant has X amount of days to get out. And if they don't, then they can come and take your stuff. And
Well, I wanted to add another little tidbit of information. And I don't have it in front of me right now because we have got corgis, and they're new, they're babies. They're about 4 or 5 months old, and the front page that I printed this off on, they ate yesterday. The dogs ate my homework. So I got it this morning, and there was paper all over my house.
oh,
And
but they're so cute,
I
Tony.
asked my husband when he got up this morning to go to the hospital to let the dogs out because they are very, very cute. They're always smiling. They have natural smiles on their faces.
They're the cutest
And
little things.
he said, they didn't want to leave. And so I got up a little bit later, and of course, after he left, that's when all hell breaks loose. And they chewed up my homework, so to speak. And the house was a mess. And so I know that my beloved is listening today at the
Hello,
house.
Jim.
Yes, he said they have our show on in the operating room.
Good.
Hi, Jim. But I had to clean up all the floor today because all of my homework was chewed up by our corgis. And they are
Wait a
not-
minute, Tony. Are you saying that the reason the corgis chewed up your homework was because Jim didn't let them out
Yes.
this morning? Oh, okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay.
Jim's fault. No, and also my fault because I left it on the floor in my study where I specifically, because I want to talk about this in our next segment, I specifically printed out some questions, and I had the answer for station manager Dick's questions specifically. And then I had all these bits and pieces of chewed up paper. But you can actually, if you Google the Texas A&M Real Estate Center, they have got all the information you can ever imagine. They have got just a world of information, lots of questions. If you have any question about the law, they've got a really, really good website and a good printout, and they can answer pretty much all of your questions.
But to wrap this up, because we're about to go to break, when they remove you from the property, they remove the possessions. In Texas, they can't just go in and take your stuff. They have to put them somewhere and hold them for the tenant, return them to the tenant. It's frowned upon if they just grab your stuff and throw it in the trash. But we're going to go to break right now. We'll be back. But you can check us out on www.legalconnectionshow.com or send us your questions at questions@legalconnectionshow.com. We'll be right back.
Hispanic Chamber Connections with Dr. Carlos Sanchez, president of the Woodlands Conroe Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, featuring event announcements, member highlights, and more. Tuesdays at 1 p.m., broadcasting from the heart of Conroe, Texas on irlonestar.com and Conroe's FM 104.5, 106.1.
Health Center Southeast Texas is a federally qualified health center. We accept Medicare, Medicaid, and most major private insurances. For our self-pay patients, we have a sliding scale discount program available. Our health centers have qualified providers and staff striving every day to provide the best quality of care to our patients. Services offered are family medicine, behavioral health services, telepsychiatry, and pediatrics. We have 4 area locations. Look up the Health Center Southeast Texas online at hcset.com.
A Lone Star Community Radio is looking for those who are interested in hosting their own talk show with monthly and weekly slots available on Conroe's FM 104.5, 106.1, and on irlonestar.com. Start your own podcast, create your first YouTube channel, and be on TV. Contact Lone Star Community Radio online at irlonestar.com or call the station message line at 936-647-3776 to take your first step into the radio world.
Welcome back to the Legal Connection with Tony and Cheryl. We are here today talking to you about landlord-tenant law, and we are on the topic of evictions. So we talked about there are three things that are required for eviction. You need notice, you need a lawsuit and trial, and removal from the property. So now we're talking about how to get a removal from the property and the writ of possession. Tony, you understand that process really well. Tell our listeners, how do you do that?
Yes. And again, if in doubt, always go to your JP Court website. Now, some JP Courts may be a little bit different, but for the most part, you're going to go fill out a form after you've gotten the judgment from the JP Court. And evictions, I think we talked about this last time, they can be really quick. You can go up there and you're before the judge just so that people can get kind of a scenario. And I'm going to go back a little bit. You can also hire companies that do evictions, and that's all they do. So they're in court for you. You don't have to be there if you're the landlord. They'll take care of it for you. They'll go up there, and basically the burden of proof is going to be on the tenant to prove that they have, pay the rent, which kind of makes it kind of bad if the tenant's been paying cash and, there's no proof. But if it's on a short train, so to speak, it can be a 5-minute eviction process. And what happens, you go up there and the judge will kind of hear both sides out. A lot of times there's no attorneys involved. It's just the landlord or maybe one of these companies that helps the landlord to go take care of it. And then they get the judgment for them to be evicted. And the tenant has 5 days to file an appeal, and most of them do. Sometimes people are new to this,
right? And
they don't know the process,
right?
But I would say 75% of the time, these are people that have been evicted before and they know the process. And another word of advice to landlords, particularly ones that aren't new to this, before you let a tenant into your property, check the JP Court sites. That's all online now. You can go see if they've been evicted before.
Good.
It could be that they're not in your jurisdiction. So you have to look at several different ones. So find out where they lived before. We've had tenants many times who have, you'll ask for their references and you'll call the number and they have a friend that's not real.
Oh, right. Absolutely.
All saying, oh, they're great tenants.
Oh, right.
So don't rely on that. Actually do your homework and look into somebody that's going to your property, because if they're professional people that know how to stay in properties without paying, then you need to find that out, and you can go look to see if they were evicted before. And particularly if they've told you on their application they've never been evicted, and then oops, there it is. They'll be right there, and it's really easy to find that kind of thing out. But you can't. There's not one major site. You have to go to the different JP courts to look it up. In Harris, Montgomery,
any
Fort Bend.
jurisdiction you think they may have lived in.
Yes, look it up, and it's real easy to find. Just do a little bit of homework. And again, these land, there's places you can hire to do that for you, but save a little bit of money. It doesn't take that long to do it yourself.
Okay, well, so they get this. They go and get a writ of possession. 5 days to get out. They can file an appeal. What happens after that?
Okay. Well, here to go back to issuing a writ of possession. Will the county court issue a writ of possession if it finds through a sworn affidavit that is true regarding the non-payment of rent that they should be evicted? And how can the tenant avoid the writ from being issued? Tenants don't want that writ of possession issued.
No.
They want to stay.
Right.
The county court shall immediately issue the writ of possession unless on or before the date of the hearing, the tenant pays into the court registry all the rent not paid according to Texas Rules of Civil Procedure and Section 24.0053. But you can Google it and find that stuff out. And the landlord's reasonable attorney fees, if any, for filing the motion. So if they want to avoid that, they're going to have to pay some money to the registry. Right. They're already not paying their rent. They're probably not going to do that. Will it make a difference if the tenant had defaulted on one or more of the prior required rent payments to the court registry? If the court finds the tenant failed to timely pay the rent into the court registry on more than one occasion, the tenant is not entitled to stay, and the issuance of the writ by paying the rent of landlords won't work. Okay. When the court finds that the tenant has defaulted on one or more prior required rent payments to the court registry, how soon can the court issue a writ of execution?
Okay.
The earliest the court may issue a writ of execution under these circumstances is on the 6th day after the writ of possession is issued. And again, a writ of possession is an order of the court enforcing a judgment to recover possession of the property. It commands the sheriff to enter and give possession of the property to the person who received the writ of possession. Okay. So may the tenants represent themselves without an attorney when a motion has been filed to dismiss an appeal for an eviction in county court, or may they defend a motion for failing to timely pay? Yes, no attorney is necessary for this. You have to follow the proper paperwork to do that. And then there's also an issue where you're dealing with Section 8 housing. Very different. Section 8 is the government housing where people go in and they qualify for the government to subsidize their housing. I thought I was going to do Section 8 because you're guaranteed your rent with Section 8 tenants. But really, it's difficult to be a landlord with Section 8 because there's so many requirements by the landlord and the tenant. So I kind of shied away from that. The beauty of it, though, is the government does pay the rent.
That's great.
They may not pay all of it if it's subsidized, but you're going to get some rent payment from the government. And there's a whole different slew of rules.
And, I want to add, I had a client not too long ago that was in the middle of a divorce. She needed a settlement before she could pay her rent. So she got in arrears, which means late on her rent. So she got a notice of eviction. She was served. She went and appealed it because I told her to, and she had to pay in the court registry. Then she got her divorce and she got some money. So she wanted to pay, and this money was stuck in the court registry until the landlord released it. So she bothered them, and they ignored her. And as soon as I made a phone call to the attorney for the landlord, he said, absolutely, we'll release it. So it's not that hard to get it out, but you may need to get an attorney just to make a phone call or write a letter so that they know that you're serious.
Well, the reason that is because they can't by law keep that money in the court registry. I mean, that's completely improper, and there's rules against that in the Texas Property Code. They will be penalized, and then that person that was going through divorce would be able to get the penalties on top of that and her attorney's fees. So that phone call is really important, and that kind of ties into the same type of thing happens when you're dealing with earnest money contracts. Happens a lot, even though that's not our segment today. earnest money will be put, but you put the earnest money down when you go to buy a house. It goes into the title company, and then there's some dispute, and it doesn't close for whatever reason. The deal is falling through, whether it's because the person buying it doesn't want it anymore, or the person selling it doesn't want to sell it anymore, and that money gets hung up in the title company. They can't release it unless both parties agree for it to be released.
Right.
I have been into so many. It's been a while. I had quite a few real estate deals like that where you couldn't get the earnest money released. I mean, you basically had to sue to get them to release the earnest money because it was a he said, she said sort of
deal. And there are no penalties involved in that situation?
There are if they're wrongfully not releasing it, but the title company doesn't have to. The title company's off the hook. Title company,
they're neutral.
So you've got to get basically a court if there's a disagreement on who it belongs to, because of course the seller wants to keep it and the person buying wants it back. Right. And so they're arguing about what the provision is and it's usually always going to be that when the person entered the earnest money contract, the house was not in the condition that they had anticipated after the inspection, and they want to back out of it. And then the seller's like, no, you knew about that. Well,
as far as the leasing situation, though, the problem was the landlord didn't want to release it, they were just kind of being lazy. I think they wanted to make
wouldn't the landlord be entitled to some of that rent? I mean,
well, not if she paid him, and she paid him. So they needed to release the money that she had paid into the registry, and they were just she was nervous that she wasn't going to get it, so she was sending them emails every day, and so, but they finally did. So what I want to,
well, now I'm curious. So why did the landlord owe her money if money was paid to the registry for rent? Usually that's for rent. The landlord would end up with it.
Well,
does she not live there anymore?
No, she lived there. She paid the money in the registry for an appeal.
Okay.
Then she got her divorce settlement, and then she paid the rent in full. Okay. So she didn't deduct. She made a mistake.
Okay.
And just so I want our listeners to know, if you've got money in that registry, I would deduct it from any rents owed. She didn't deduct it from the rents owed. She paid them in full to bring her up to date. So she wanted that money released her. But the landlord was like, whoa, we need attorney's fees. When I finally talked to the attorney said, no, you don't need attorney's fees. I haven't done anything because she paid. So I'll release that money to you. No problem. I'll even apply it to her next month rent if you want to. I'll give it back to her. So you can get it out. It's, and if they're slow, everyone's hyper about money, especially renters that are in arrears because they don't have very much.
Right.
And so, relax. You may need to get an attorney.
But we have a situation like Dick is in too, though, where perhaps it's not habitable and they didn't want to pay the rent because they have a situation that they're going to take care of. And so there's always two sides of the story. But the situation I'm dealing with right now with a particular eviction, and I'm just helping this guy out, is it was a rent to own and the mom died. And, well, I'll say the mom. The guy I'm helping's mother died. And so he inherited the property. She had a contract for deed to buy the property, but the rent was really, really low. And the woman stopped paying the rent to the estate. She took advantage of it. And she also her rent was supposed to increase and she stopped paying that. And so she has not left yet. The guy went to court on his own. He went to JP court, got the eviction, and she immediately, because she had done this before, filed a pauper's affidavit to be able to stay. And typically your bond to stay in the property, you have to appeal it within 5 days, and your bond to stay in is 2 months rent. But if you file a pauper's affidavit with the right argument, showing that you don't have the money and, you have a hardship and whatever, all the rules, then you don't have to pay that bond. And that really puts the landlord at a disadvantage because here they are now, you're still in the property. They've appealed it. There's no money to go because there's a pauper's affidavit file to go to appeal to the county court. So they're still in the property. So, and then they can argue that they need a continuance and they're still in your property. How do you get them out?
Right.
So, so what are the rules? Are there any special rules when a pauper's affidavit has been filed? Yes. If either party files a contest under section 24.0053 regarding the amount of rent, at the same time, the landlord can contest the tenant's filing a pauper's affidavit under the same provision. Actually, it's the same part of the code, 24.0052D. The Justice Court may hold the hearing on both issues at the same time. The problem with this is you only have a certain amount of time to contest the pauper's affidavit. So if your landlord...
From the landlord's perspective?
Yeah, you need to watch out for what they're doing. This guy didn't do that. He'd let it go. And so
how long
now,
do you have?
I believe it's 10 days to.
So not very long.
Not very long at all. It's 5 to 10 days, and I can look at that exact date. But be careful because you have to contest it, or they'll be in there. They can lie on the pauper's affidavit. They may have
Right.
tons of money.
Right.
They just don't want to pay the rent.
Right.
And so this particular case ended up in county court, and you don't have to serve each other because you've already been served. It's on an appeal.
Mhm.
And so now he's got to go through the same situation. It's de novo. You start all over again arguing that the rent wasn't paid. And they're supposed to be paying rent into the registry, but she's not paying the rent in the registry. So she's ultimately going to lose this case. But
Even with the pauper's affidavit, they have to pay the rent.
yes, rent to the
If
registry.
you don't
Mhm.
pay, you don't stay.
Right. That's exactly right. Mhm.
Okay.
Now, can a prevailing landlord recover attorney's fees without sending a notice? Yes. The prevailing landlord may avoid having to send the notice and still recover reasonable attorney's fees with a written lease and entitles the landlord to recover attorney's fees for an eviction under the Texas Property Code 24.006. And there's various other things. Is it possible for the tenant to recover reasonable attorney fees from a landlord if the tenant prevails? Yes, the prevailing tenant may recover reasonable attorney's fees under 2 conditions. The landlord provided the tenant with a required notice under 24.006, or the written lease entitles the landlord or the tenant to recover attorney's fees if they prevail.
Okay. Very good. Well, we're going to go to break here. We just want you to know, our listeners, that we are here for you to help you in your legal situations. We hope that the topics that we're choosing are relevant to your situations. We believe they are. You can give us a call at 281-529-5862 with your questions and comments. We'll be right back after the break, guys.
Our talk shows and music shows are looking for sponsors. Want to expand your brand awareness? Reach the hyper-local audience in Montgomery County? The Lone Star Community Radio sponsorships accomplish this. Want to see our stats and rates? Check out irlonestar.com/sponsor for more information. Or call in and leave us a message at 936-647-3776 with your question. Get seen on TV or YouTube and heard on our podcast, FM, and internet radio. Sponsor your local radio station with Lone Star Community Radio.
Is there someone you know who is hooked on vintage aircraft? Follow the Commemorative Air Force and its fleet of World War II planes, including the mighty B-17 Flying Fortress Texas Raiders, which is based in Conroe, Texas. Texas Raiders tours locally and all around the United States, offering the public a chance to put their hands on aviation history. What could be a more perfect gift than a flight on a historic B-17? Taking to the sky on the iconic bomber is an experience that will never be forgotten. For the touring schedule, reservations, or more information, go to b17texasraiders.org or call 855-FLY-A-B-17.
Lone Star Community Radio presents the Lone Star Radio Troupe. This talented cast will perform radio plays right here in the Lone Star Studios located in downtown Conroe. There will be a new performance every first Sunday of the month. And if you miss the broadcast, just go to Lone Star Community Radio's podcast or YouTube anytime during that month. Go to our LoneStar.com archives to find the Lone Star Radio Troupe's latest play that's available. This is Lone Star Community Radio, Conroe's 104.5 FM and 106.1 FM community station. Find us on the web at irlonestar.com. Lone Star Community Radio is a supporter to the performing arts in Montgomery County, Texas.
Welcome back to the Legal Connection with Tony and Cheryl. Today we're talking about leases and rental agreements, and we're talking about evictions from both the perspective of the landlord and the tenant. Now we're going to get to some questions, and we're going to answer a question our station manager had last week about his fiance and the situation with her rental. So Tony has an answer for Dick.
Yes, and I have more questions too, because I forget these things. Now, Dick, is it your fiance or your girlfriend? Are y'all engaged? Fiance. And I'm curious now, when is the big date?
December 29th.
December. Oh, okay. December 29th. Good. And
that's a great time to have a wedding.
It
I think.
is.
Yeah.
Because we don't have really, is it going to be in Houston or Conroe area?
No.
Oh, it's not. Where is it?
It's going to be Beaumont.
In Beaumont.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, in the Gulf Coast region, we don't have particularly cold Decembers. January and February are terrible months. So it should be wonderful. Remember many, many years during my Christmases when I'd get bikes and stuff, and we were always riding with our shorts on around Christmas. So,
Yeah.
okay. So my next question is,
Good memories.
you had told us last week that your fiance's apartment had developed a rodent problem, and she also has a roommate, and that for the time being, because your fiance is, I guess, afraid of rodents or didn't have to deal with it, or maybe for other reasons, maybe she just wanted to be close to you.
It's
She's
possible.
Yes, living with you now for a while until that's taken care of. Now, so my question is, did her roommate come back?
Yes.
Okay, and so what has the roommate done with respect to this problem?
She rented a hotel.
Oh,
She
okay.
did.
Okay.
Okay, and so my next question is, did they contact the landlord in writing about the problem? Did they email or?
Well, I mean, they were contacted about the issue, and that's the main communication point is through text messages.
Okay.
And then on top of that, it's a property manager, not the. I guess
Oh.
it's the landlord doesn't live in the state.
Okay. Okay.
So
we're going to have answers for you now. So nothing. They haven't had any resolution to the problem yet.
well, what they decided to do, the initial push was they were going to send the normal guy who
Mhm.
fixes everything.
Mhm.
Oh, right. The typical handyman.
The
I remember
typical,
that.
yeah, the local handyman who
Uh-huh.
does everything, and then the ladies felt that wasn't adequate enough because of the potential of the infestation, especially after Harvey.
Mhm.
Because
Yes.
that was something I've always
Right.
saying, with the rain being so bad, especially all the construction happening around your place.
Yes.
That this might be a temporary thing. It's not, might be like it's the rats have been living there for 10 years,
Right.
and it might have been just a recent thing. And then so the property manager did settle for having an actual exterminator come out.
Uh-huh.
And with the exterminator, he found 30 holes, 30
Right.
possible breaches,
Mhm.
and
So
he
creepy.
found remains.
Yeah, the
remains,
black oily stuff.
black
you
oil
said?
stuff going in and out of the house, and which is, he said, that is caused by rodents or by animals that aren't clean, and it's just
Mhm.
they're exiting and leaving so much.
Uh-huh.
So they laid out traps over the weekend. They found 3 rats
Oof.
in one of the traps in the attic,
Oh, good.
and
night.
then basically what it comes down to now is, when is it safe to move back in? I visited the property over the weekend, went in, and I didn't really see anything. I checked some of the traps inside the house, but
Mhm.
nothing really looked to be disturbed.
Okay.
I checked the pantries. I cleaned out all the pantry food,
Well, that was nice.
and
No
nothing
kidding. What a
nothing
nice
was.
guy.
What a nice fiance.
So you're like the kind of radio manager and
Excellent
Yeah, and I did,
fiance.
and I also changed her battery that day too.
Okay.
So,
Man, that's
Wow.
incredible.
but
What
no,
a man,
I-
what a man, what a man,
really
what a
the
man.
discussion came down to was the living in the hotel, and especially what the other tenants are doing,
Uh-huh.
because when it comes down to the lease, I don't think the ladies knew what to do because the other tenants are staying there.
Well, you don't have
So-
to rely on what somebody else does.
No, you
need
really
to do
don't.
What's right for you, because I'd had some questions, over on this topic, and the tenants had babies, and you can't have rodents, you can't have rats, you can't have that kind of thing when you have a baby.
No.
And that the landlord wasn't doing the right thing. Well, here is the book answer on legally on kind of what the position is and did they do the right thing. And it sounds like it was kind of a combination. Which conditions must a landlord repair? Section 92.052B of the Texas Property Code sets the basic premise for this subchapter. The landlord must make a diligent effort to repair or remedy any condition when the tenant has specified the condition in a notice to the person who collects the rent or to the place where the rent is normally paid. Okay.
That would be your text message.
Right. The tenant is current in rent payments when the notice is given. That's huge in Texas. If your rent's not current, they don't have to do anything.
Really?
So yeah, so make sure they're current on the rent. And the condition, and there's 2 little subtopics. Condition materially affects the health or safety of an ordinary tenant, which in your fiance situation it
It
would,
would.
or arises from the landlord's failure to provide and maintain in good operating condition a device to supply hot water of a minimum temperature. Okay, so that has to do with hot water heaters. The notice must be in writing only if the written lease requires it to be so. But you want to protect yourself legally to always have that kind of notice in writing to prove it happened. As a practical matter, all notices should be in writing and either delivered in person or sent by certified mail, return receipt requested. I think email these days by the Texas Rules of Civil Procedure lets you kind of email because you can show receipt, particularly when they've responded.
Right.
Email or text work pretty well, particularly when you've shown a judge. Otherwise, providing the notice was served may be difficult. If delivered, some verifications such as a witness or written acknowledgement from the recipient is needed. Okay. Now, how do
In other words, you have to paper it up really well. Just do it in
just
writing.
So that you
Paper
don't
it
have
up.
to have a bunch of witnesses and then their veracity has to be determined by the judge and that kind of thing. Just make it easy on yourself. Have a writing that you gave them the notice. Now,
Right.
how do tenants know who to contact for the repairs? Landlords who have on-site management or a superintendent's office for residential rental property must provide a 24-hour phone number for reporting emergencies on the leased premises that materially affect the physical health or safety of an ordinary tenant. That number must be posted outside the management or superintendent's office per Texas Property Code 92.020. So hopefully they have that for your fiance situation. Now, what about landlords in other situations? Landlords who do not have on-site management or a superintendent's office. They must, the superintendent's office must provide the tenants a telephone number for reporting emergencies. And usually that's in the lease. But they apparently got a hold of who needed to take care of this. Now, are there exceptions to this rule? Yes. The rules do not apply to or affect a local ordinance governing a landlord's obligation to provide for a 24-hour contact notice. And that doesn't apply actually in Montgomery County. They always have to have that on site. And you should know in your lease when you move in who you need to contact in case of emergency.
Mm-hmm.
Now, which conditions need not be repaired by the landlord? This is really important because it's kind of what we touched on before. Unless the problem is caused by normal wear and tear, the landlord has no duty to repair the conditions caused by the tenant, a lawful occupant of the apartment, a member of the tenant's family, or a tenant's guest. But that's overridden if there's a health and safety issue. But if the tenant caused it, and that's like we talked about last week, if the landlord want to be honoring and say, well, you brought the rats in, or you brought them in because
they left food out all the time.
Yeah, if you left them out, or somebody, you have a guest that came over that was, an Uncle Festus, that lived out in the boonies, and he has a pet rat and it multiplied or whatever.
Right.
And they can prove that, or they're alleging that, then you've got some more issues. So there's always this gray area, and it's always best just to let them know there's a condition and that it wasn't there before, and then try to tick it off. Yeah, we didn't have any other occupants. It wasn't a member of my family. None of my guests created this. The problem your fiance has is that you said it was a duplex, so there were some tenants in the other place.
Yes.
Okay, and so they could allege that the landlord could say, it's not my problem. We need to get with them. They probably caused it. So that would be something where you'd need to look at the lease to see what provisions were accounted for when they went to go.
In reality, though, this scenario, the question I had for them is, when you discover like a rats or whatever in the house and you feel unsafe being there,
Mm-hmm.
well, you got to figure out what the first thing to do is, besides contacting and doing all those things, is you're not staying there that day.
Right.
Right.
So if I, in that situation, go to a hotel, book a hotel,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
was that something I sent a bill to the landlord?
Yes.
Yes.
You
because
do.
Particularly if it's not normal wear and tear. Obviously, rodents are not normal wear and tear. It's a health and safety issue. From the landlord's perspective, you have to look at it due to construction and the flood. Could they have anticipated a rat problem?
Well,
not if it didn't happen.
But their insurance would cover that. The landlord's insurance would cover unanticipated things.
Well, that's what I was trying to convey to them, is especially when he came out and reported there's over like 30 holes or breaches.
Right.
To me, that told me that they have not been doing their due diligence as a landlord of preventing.
And then from the landlord's perspective, they'll say, oh, well, as a tenant, you should be aware of what's going on here. and the tenant should call.
Well,
which
these
she
are
did.
also breaches that aren't the front door. This is something that's in the roof. Like he went into the attic.
Okay.
Like this isn't something that like you or I who go in and out of the house would see these holes. This is something that they found a hole about as big as a grapefruit.
Wow.
Under one of the vents on the roof.
Well, then
And
it's not
so-
the leaser's. It's not the tenant's responsibility. I mean, the tenant's
isn't,
responsibility.
But you have to look at it from, I'm looking, so we're not looking at both perspectives. Perhaps this is the only unit that this landlord owns, and he's not that savvy of a landlord. Who knows? And he's kind of giving, because I know we're landlords and we don't want to sort of get in people's faces, and we just want to collect the rent. If they're happy, they'll notify us. So there's another gray area is, would this be anticipated? I would believe after Harvey that there would be a responsibility by the landlord to go check out their property.
That and it's also like what position as a tenant, what power do you have? Because you're also dealing with, and you know, if she's listening, don't take this the wrong way. You're dealing with somebody who will not have anything to do with rats.
Right.
So, I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
No. If there's a rat, and of course, now we had a different story, but when we had 5 kids, Jim had 3 kids, I had 2, and we had 2 little white mice, and we didn't know one was a girl, one was a boy, and we learned that, and we ended up having like 75 of these mice, like almost overnight. I had no idea it was like Willard, but they were real cute. And then they got in our house, but they were mice. They weren't rats. They were like little special. And then the guy that came out from Orkin was like, "Hey, can I have them for my snakes?" And we're like, "No." And then we kept finding them and trying to revive. So it was a different situation. We're talking about actual rodents or a roach infestation that happens a lot in this region, a lot, and it can get out of control.
Right.
In that situation, the landlord needs to get a professional. Because that's not normal wear and tear, and that is a health and safety issue.
A question I had too was with her in the situation, because this is something that, like I said, immediately some things have to be taken, steps have to be taken immediately. And when the exterminator did come out, he said it would take about a week.
Oh, good night.
To really see if there's any change.
Oh, brother.
And what he did was he went in to the house, he covered up 28 of the 30 holes. And
How
then
do you cover them?
just like with metal casings or anything that is secured the holes. And then 2 of the holes, he set up traps in the sense of they can leave, but they can't go in. So that's like the only way they can get out.
Okay.
So
did he set traps?
He set traps inside the building.
That's the pretty standard for them to immediately do that.
And this was the professional rat exterminator.
Yeah. And then the question I had for Holly, and this is just for you and your listeners, what would happen if, say this does happen, can you withhold payment because like for a while, I would say for about 3 days, there really wasn't a confirmed response.
Okay. And that's the next thing I was going to get to. I'm glad that you asked that. It kind of segues into what do you do?
We have about 5 more minutes.
Okay. And then we have a lot of other questions on this, but this is a very common problem.
Right.
Okay. So and I'm going to answer your question sort of in 2 segments. Who has the burden normally in a judicial proceeding? And when something happens like that, you have to look at it from the perspective, particularly since we're attorneys. What are my rights and what will happen next if I have to take that step to go to court?
Right.
Because that's what a landlord is going to look like. That's what a tenant's going to look at. Now, normally in a judicial proceeding, the tenant must prove that the landlord failed to repair or remedy a condition that materially affects the health or safety of an ordinary tenant. However, the landlord must assume this burden if the tenant can show that 1, reasonable time has elapsed since the initial notice to repair was given. Okay. So, and then there's a reasonable time that through the court cases, they've determined what is deemed reasonable.
But what about emergency situations?
Well, emergency situations, okay, and that kind of goes to just common sense. And I think we're going to get to that too, but just off the top of my head, since I know this, if you're in an emergency situation, use common sense. This is what you always do. If it's a real emergency situation, call 911. If somebody's breaking in, if there's a fire, get out. Take care of yourself. Your landlord's not going to be there. You have to be kind of use your brain. Emergency situation, get out. We don't know who caused what, but protect yourself, protect your property. But your health and safety comes before your property. Get your animals out, get out, just go. Harvey would have been a perfect situation for that. Emergency situation at the time. You've got rising waters. You could have snakes. You get out. You take care of yourself. Don't be waiting on your landlord to tell you, because maybe your landlord's also in the same emergency situation. But what is reasonable when it's a health and safety issue and you're not quite sure, and the landlord may not be in town, so to speak, or not even so to speak, but what if you're trying to get a hold of them and you can't find the representative? There's still a reasonable time, because you have to give some, the benefit of the doubt to just a normal person that's taking care of it if you don't have an on-site management team for your property. Now, a subsequent written notice, that these things have to happen. A subsequent written notice was given to the landlord demanding an explanation for the delay. So I'll go back to kind of explain that these are 3 things that have to happen for the burden to be, for the landlord to assume a burden for an emergency. Reasonable time has lapsed since the initial notice to repair was given by the tenant. A subsequent written notice was given by the tenant to the landlord demanding an explanation for the delay, assuming this is not like a critical emergency, but you've already started to mitigate your own damages. And the landlord failed to make the repairs or give a written explanation for the delay within 5 days after the second demand was received. So that tells me 5 days is reasonable per the courts, but I would say the text, the phone call, the email, get with your landlord immediately and don't wait 5 days to respond. I would say your 2 notices should be, if it's something serious like this, sort of in repetition, because what if it's deemed not an emergency? What if the rat was her roommate's friend's pet rat and it wasn't really a rat, it was just a mouse, and they left and they went to a hotel? The landlord wouldn't be responsible for paying for hotel and something like that. So.
Okay, but what about if it is a rat? Okay, well, looks like we're going to go to break here, but this is all we have today. This is all the time we have today. But I would say, Dick, that she can withhold the amount that she had to pay for lodging in the interim and then fight it out later.
And we're going to have a third segment on landlord.
Looks like we need it.
To cover the exact same issues, because we didn't get almost none of our listener questions.